There are lots of things that when we're kids we think are going to be a much bigger deal for us as adults. Kids do this, especially when we're young, we're just barely able to begin understanding things. We assume that the things we see and we watch on TV, whether cartoons or otherwise, are going to be a much bigger deal when we get older than oftentimes they appear to be. One of those is quicksand, right? I grew up watching Adam West Batman and Looney Tunes and other shows that were on when I was a kid, and quicksand always seemed like it was going to be a much bigger deal as an adult because they were always dealing, seemed like, with quicksand in one way, shape, or form. And so I thought that was going to be something that I was going to have to deal with, at least my 8-year-old self did. But as an adult, and because I'm about to turn 40, I figure I should start thinking of myself as an adult at some point. I have figured out that kids love quicksand because it's something that they can understand, something that makes sense to them. And writers love quicksand because, well, it's an easy plot device. Often a lazy plot device too, but it's an easy one that they can make use of. But that's one thing. That's one thing that as a kid I thought was going to be a much bigger deal. Another one is that I thought it would be a much bigger deal to claim things. I grew up watching Daffy Duck and Duck Dodgers, and he'd take his flag out and had the big earth on the flag and all of that, and he'd go and he'd stake his claim in there, planting his flag in the ground and claim that space. I thought, as a kid, we were going to spend a lot more time claiming things like that because that's what I saw all the time. They would make those claims. Now, kid me, thought there'd be a lot more of staking of claims. As an adult, I've realized that there's really not as many stake claiming going on, as much stake claiming going on as I thought. But to be fair, I do like claiming steaks, especially if they are a nice medium rare and they cut nicely with a knife and they are tasty. I really should apologize for that one, but I'm not because I kind of thought it was funny. That being said, we actually do make a lot of claims. We do stake our claims in a lot of different ways, but as adults, they're often more subtle than what we expect as kids. Because how many of you remember those legendary words? That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. How many of you remember that? Now, my generation, we didn't get to see that live. I read about it in history books, saw the recordings of the videos of that. My generation, our greatest statement comes in the Bill Pullman speech from Independence Day. That's a little goofy, but it fits the theme of space fairly well. But another way more real than Independence Day that we have, my generation has of that, is just recently we watched as the U.S. again kind of staked its claim to space with Bob and Doug, two normal sounding names for a couple of guys who strapped themselves to the top of an experimental rocket to fly to the space station for the first time. In my generation, after the space shuttle fleet was grounded, these are the first two guys to go back up, leaving the U.S. to go and fly into space. They are going to be remembered very well for that. But those are times that are those are ways that we stake our claim in places, even if that place is outer space. But there's another way of staking our claim that has also made its way into our history books. And that is Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, where he says in there, "I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." In it, he was doing something very different. Something that was even more powerful. He was staking his claim on an idea that all people are actually created equal, and that we can live as equals in society together. That is a big claim to stake. It is a powerful idea that lives in us today, but still is far outside of our grasp because we haven't really lived up to it yet, but we're trying. This is maybe one of those things from my childhood that actually is important as an adult, just not in the way that I thought. It's often harder to see as an adult what it means to stake our claim on something, because we spend a lot of time staking our claim, but it just is not as visible as we think. Now, we've spent a lot of time over the last few weeks talking about the Jewish people as they were returning from exile, and about the hard work that they had to do when they got back, and about the struggles that they faced in making all of this happen, because they had many struggles. And the first was that they just had simply to just get back. They weren't sure that that was actually going to happen. They were folks that wanted it, that were trying to get there, but they weren't sure it was actually going to be a thing until suddenly it was a thing. When the Babylonians were conquered by this new empire, the Persian Empire, and their king Cyrus, who laid claim to everything that the Babylonians had, including the people who had been exiled from Judah. And he laid claim on them and let them go home. But then when they got home, they saw that there were all these other competing claims around them. These competing claims from folks that never left. Because remember, not all of the folks left in the exile. There were still a lot of people that stayed in place. And also, there were, when that group left and they were exiled, there was a new group of folks that came in and took their place and now had been there for 70 years and who had laid claim to those places. And now, watching these folks returning from exile, they were watching as these outsiders were trying to come and take their claim, even though they were the ones who were returning home. They also, these Jewish people who were returning from exile, had to take a look at themselves, because they were struggling in their own lives. So much was going on, so much had happened, so many bad habits had come up that they had to figure out what to do with them and to break those bad habits. They also had things that they were doing that were wrong, but they weren't necessarily bad habits. But they just didn't know any different, know any better. And so they were trying to figure that out. And those are two different things. Something doesn't have to be a bad habit to be wrong. It can just be something that we have learned to do wrongly. And so they're trying to figure all of this out. Somewhere along the way, they had to make a claim to their own life. To their own life and who they were, to be different than they were before. And we watch as the story unfolds through these prophets as they were working to make those claims on themselves and to overcome what was there. Imagine how hard that would be, that one of the things you have to do is to stake a claim in your own life. But there's still one more claim that is even more important than all of these others. We have looked so much at what the Jewish people were doing when they returned from exile and what they were dealing with, but there's still one more claim that is left. For that, we look into chapter 8, verses 2 and 3. The Lord of heavenly forces proclaims, I care passionately about Zion. I burn with passion for her. The Lord proclaims, I have returned to Zion. I will settle in Jerusalem. Jerusalem will be called the city of truth. The mountain of the Lord of heavenly forces will be the holy mountain. Did you catch that as we were reading through Zechariah chapter 8 before the message started? And it's not just in that what we read there, but all through chapter 8 are these series of statements where God is proclaiming. We can be verse 2, verse 3, verse 4, 6, 7, 9, 14, 19, 20, 23. All of these times God is proclaiming what he is. And what I love about chapter 8 is that God is laying claim to his people. And this is one of the things that we'll miss if we aren't careful, because God isn't just sending his people back to their homeland, but he is laying claim to them. They are his, and he wants there to be no doubt about that. All through chapter 8, we are reminded that they are his. And it's not just there, and it's not just there in chapter 8 either, but we look to the rest of the prophet Zechariah, the rest of what he writes after that. God is reinforcing this claim over and over and over again that they are his people. But the other thing about this, though, is that God doesn't tell them that this is going to be easy. And that actually is good news. Have you ever had someone try and tell you that something is easy and you want to look at them and you go, I know better than that. I see what's going on around here. I know how this is working. This is not going to be as easy as you think it is. And it feels patronizing. And it feels like there's just something off about it. God doesn't tell them that it's going to be easy. And that is good news, actually. Because that says God gets it. God gets that this is going to be a struggle, that this is going to be difficult, but he wants them to remember, first and foremost, whose they are. Go to verse 12 in chapter 8. The seed is healthy. The vine will give its fruit. The land will give its produce. The heavens will give its due. I will give the remnant of this people all these things. The focus here, as it is in several places, is on the remnant. It's really easy to get lost in the other things that God is saying here, but the focus is on this remnant. God knows that things have changed. God knows that there's not as many of them coming back from exile as there were that left. A lot of things have changed in the 70 years since last March. Since the start of the exile. But we also remember the stories. That this isn't the first time that God has started with a remnant. Go all the way back to Genesis chapter 1. There was Adam and Eve who started the whole thing off. There is Noah and his family that were a remnant of all that were there at one time. Abraham and his wife Sarah, they were the first family, not even counting the people that their household that came with them, but just Abraham and Sarah and their promised son that they were going to have, but they didn't have at the start of this, that they weren't sure was really going to be a thing. But God made his promise to this group, to this small family, this remnant that were there. You can even look to the time of Judges, to a time when we watch as the story unfolds, and we see a remnant develop in front of us from Gideon as he is going out, and we watch as his force is winnowed down smaller and smaller and smaller until it gets just to that remnant that is left. God works with the remnant because God has laid claim to them. He has claimed them as his own. Even when they struggle, even when they turn away, even when they lay claim in directions that are contrary to what God is wanting, God has still claimed them. God has proclaimed, and he has claimed us. We go into the New Testament in the time of the Gospels, and we see as Jesus and his group of disciples are acting as the next remnant. Now, they really aren't a remnant so much as they are a group of people that are just beginning to come together in a small group to do this work. But Jesus was doing something new in them, something that was needed. God is laying claim on them and on us in a way that is different from what had happened before. And beyond all believability, it worked. It really shouldn't have worked. You don't have this small group of people that are a very small minority of a minority group to begin with that are being heavily watched over by the Romans because they have this tendency to get themselves into trouble. It shouldn't have worked, especially when their leader is crucified in a very public way. It should not have worked. And yet from this small group comes this organization that is going to span millennia, thousands of years. That's not how that works, except that God proclaimed. God spoke the word, and the word came to the people, and God claimed us as his own. Today, I want us to do something different and remind us and remind myself of the big truth. That it's easy to get caught up in the things we think that we should be doing or that we're doing wrong or that we need to do better. That's easy to get caught up in those things. In these stories about these folks that were returning from exile, it's easy to get caught up in the people and in their story. And there's enough there that we can follow them and follow them and follow them, and we can get lost in all that is going on, and we can forget the rest of what it is that is taking place. But for everything that is going on, what we need to know and what we need to remember is that we are God's. He has laid claim to us, such that he sent his only Son so that we can see that claim in person and in the flesh. Let us go into this week, into a world that needs to know that claim on them. Let us go and live out that claim to help others come to know and to experience and to feel God's claim on their life and what that can bring, not just for them, but help them to live a more complete life with God and with God's claim on them than they can ever have on their own. Let us go and do this in the name of the claim that was made on us, the word that was spoken and brought into being, and set this path in front of us so that we can know that we are God's. Let us go in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Would you take a few moments and to reflect on this and to look at your own life and see where God is making his claim on you and how we can live that out better. And when you're ready, I invite you to join in singing our last song for today.